Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Navigating Fortune 100 Collaboration for Early Stage Startups. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm the Director of Programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat. Now, we've got a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Firstly, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. We'd love to see where you're coming in from. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A near the end of the event, so please submit those questions for us in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We'll try our best to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center would be possible without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for a Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We're humbled by their contributions and hope you're grateful too. Now, before we get started, I'm going to launch a couple polls to get us take a step back and take a temperature gauge on how all of us are doing today. So the first poll, how are you feeling about your business right now? Are you feeling optimistic, in survival mode, feeling a little anxiety? Let us know. We use these data points to help provide more wellness resources for our entrepreneurs and guide the programs that we provide for you. So thank you for voting. Optimism looks like it's at the top of the key. Let me give this another moment. All righty, I'm going to end this poll. Share those results. Looks like optimism is in the lead, but there is a little bit of survivability and anxiety in there. So hopefully our presentation today will help alleviate some of that. Second poll, what's keeping you up at night? So what can we build programmatically to help you, the entrepreneurs out there, in terms of finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot team, or just survival mode? So let us know. We use this information to build the next couple of months of programs. All righty, they're coming right in. Let's see where we're coming in from. We've got Texas. Let's see, like bold research from Quincy. All righty, South Carolina, Maryland, Tulsa, Dallas, Texas. All righty, Oregon, UAE, awesome. Vegas, all over the board. All righty, I'm going to end this poll. Share those results. Toronto, awesome. Looks like marketing is in the lead. So we will take this and build for the future for you. All righty. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest in the chat, Tomasz Kolodziejak. Tomasz, sorry, I butchered your name, but he's a former open innovation and strategy and new products, partnerships, investments, and points of contacts. Tomasz, welcome. And sorry I fluffed your name. I practiced it.
No, we practice it. No worries. You got it. You got it really well.
All right. Hey, well, I'm looking forward to this. Over to you, my friend.
Thanks, Colin. Happy to be here. I'm going to show my slides real quick. And while I do that, I just want to thank Michelle and Anna for setting it up, and Colin, obviously. Quick story. I met Colin at NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. I was just looking it up, probably 2017. So a couple years ago. And then we sort of kept in touch, and then we didn't. So you never know where these, connections go to. So I've been fortunate to have that. So let me pull up my slides and we can begin. All right, share screen. Here we go. You guys tell me if you can see it. All right, I think we're live. So I'm glad everybody's optimistic, 70%. So let's try to keep it this way. Okay, so this is my presentation. So essentially, let me just minimize my screen. Okay, here we go. So navigating Fortune 100 collaboration for early stage startups. So I noticed in, folks that signed up, a lot of you are early stage. So I'll try to tailor it to that. And, some folks are pre-revenue, revenue. So we'll start from the basics and kind of grow from there. So if you really boil down, the presentation topic is how to work with Fortune 100 companies in Silicon Valley. And I want to talk about Silicon Valley because that's where I am right now. And that's where I've been for the past 10 plus years. So this is my experience. And I really think it is a competitive advantage to do it here with these partnerships. So let me give you just brief background about myself. So the past decade and some change, if you split my experience in half, so half of it was as an entrepreneur, and we really were able to get these partnerships with Fortune 100 really well, whether that's Stanford investing in a company through Stanford StartX, or Johnson & Johnson being an investor, or really working with airlines like ANA, KLM, or Pfizer. So we really had these corporate executives circling us. And as you know, in a startup journey, it's ups and downs. But I really believe, we did that part well. So I want to speak to it. And then we ultimately got acquired. So I'll tell you how I did it as an entrepreneur, and also how I have done it as a corporate innovator. So this is my time at Samsung. Very recently, I was part of the tech strategy team, which looks at startups for proof of concepts, for investment, and things like that. So we've done numerous POCs with startups, thousands of hours of meeting the companies. And one of the crown jewels of the team was working with Calm meditation app. And some of you might be familiar with Calm. At the time when we started working with them, they're a pretty small startup, just starting, and we were able to put them on Samsung phones through Samsung Health to about 70 million phones through digital health. So you can see kind of how beneficial it could be as a small or mid-sized startup to join these big companies in some shape or form of partnership. So this is my background. So I'm going to talk about how to do it from a corporate perspective, what I've seen, and how to do it from a startup perspective. And obviously my audience is startups, so I'll focus on that the most. Since leaving Samsung recently, I've been mentoring for Techstars, Plug and Play, things like that. And obviously NASDAQ, been a big friend of these folks. So they have some great programs as well. So let's get started. And keep in mind, there's a Q&A at the very end. So save your questions then. So really, if we begin, how, this essentially boils down to why and how to partner with the big guys, I call them, in Silicon Valley as an early stage startup. And some of you might be familiar why. We'll just go quickly through that. I think there's a couple of things. One why is innovation is hard for Fortune 100. Big companies are really risk averse. I've kind of seen it firsthand. They spend a lot for that innovation piece, but it's really hard to get it through the chains and things like that. So sometimes it's easier just to work with companies. So that's one, and we'll go a little bit deeper on each one. Two, value signaling. As some of you might know, there's so many startups these days. There's so many resources for companies. How do you stand out, right? In 2020, there was about 1.3 million technology startups in the world. That number's increased. And how do you actually value signal that you're sort of this one that we should trust, right? And the third piece is, there could be acquisition opportunity. You could take it, you may or may not, but you're actually building that relationship for potentially for that. So let's start with a poll, and you can just do it in your head. I don't think it will be interactive, but this is something Matthew and Allison did as a research piece. And they talked to corporates and asked them, hey, corporate employees, where will the next important innovation come from in your industry? And they surveyed a bunch of people, and they said, is it your company? Is it your industry, or outside your industry? And as you might anticipate, I'll show you the results. Not very many thought it would come actually from the corporate, sort of grown internally innovation. A lot of folks said industry or outside. So this kind of shows how, I want to put it boldly, Fortune 100 needs you. And I really want to kind of emphasize that, because I think times have changed. It's not just, you hoping to talk to these big corporations that have a lot of money. Really, corporations need this innovation. For example, Samsung, in the good quarters, they made about $16 billion in profit. And that's profit, not revenue. But they still seek innovation, right? They want to anticipate what's next. And who does it the best? Well, really startups, because by the time, corporates get into it, maybe there's another shift. So they're good at, sort of looking at the big changes, not really good at executing. So Fortune 100 needs you. Here's a caveat. Fortune 100 only needs the winners, right? And as we know, 90 or more, 95% of startups fail. So how do they actually place their bets? You can sort of look at it as gambling, right? Which startup will succeed? Nobody really knows. If we knew that, we would invest and sort of, we're doing these bets as we speak, and corporates do the same thing. So again, innovation is hard. How do they scout for winners? Well, they do investment. So that's corporate venture capital, as most of you probably heard of. So that's like being closer to the company on the cap table of a startup. And there's stages. You can have corporate VCs, early stage, you can have them later stage. So there's variety of vehicles there. Another thing is pilots. So you can have a pilot with a company, maybe if you're a slightly more established startup, or you can have a POC that's kind of a step below that, right? So validating your technology with this big corporate, and a lot of corporates have programs for that as well, and contracts, all kinds of shapes of form of a contract there. So innovation is hard. Corporates do it this way. Number two, value signaling. You all know this as entrepreneurs, right? You want these logos to show on your deck, right? That kind of de-risks the situation often. And you can think about it as, why would you take money from a known VC firm? For example, top firm like Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia. Why would you take money from them if you can versus another VC? Well, even though if they're not as helpful, because maybe they have other successful portfolio companies, they have that brand, they have that stamp that a lot of other VCs would want to invest in you. So you want these kind of names on your cap tables, or on your decks to kind of validate your idea, right? It shows something that you've been able to convince these folks at corporations. The same goes in de-risking, startups through accelerators, YC, Stanford StartX, Berkeley, so on. It gives you that edge that you are, worth talking to. Maybe you're doing something interesting, particularly for first-time founders. And number three, and we'll go to how you might want to be acquired. What I've seen, really doesn't take one or two meetings to get acquired. It's a relationship building, right? It takes year plus to get to that stage and due diligence and so on. So, building these relationships for acquisitions could be really helpful, and having just an opportunity or, that you could potentially be acquired it could be really helpful. I've talked to this entrepreneur. She was building a fintech startup, and she started building a relationship with these fintech unicorns when she started. And obviously there was nothing to acquire early on, or the first year and a half, there wasn't acquisition material. But ultimately she was acquired after 4 years, but the kind of the relationship started at 4, right? So it kind of gives you perspective. 4, maybe a stretch, but if you can build these relationships, I think it's really helpful to have, gives you option. And, there could be the storm, funding dries out, whatever it may be. Startups are kind of not the easiest. It's kind of a risky thing to do. So you might want to have options. All right. So why is pretty obvious now. How do we do this? Right. So I have 4 different things I want to talk about. And, since some of you are abroad, I saw different states, but I think there's folks from outside Silicon Valley. Number one, how do you get to these corporates is what I call the best kept secret, which is corporate innovation offices in the Valley. 2, how to navigate the maze. I'll talk about that a little more because there's more than one corporate innovation office potentially per big corporate. Use FOMO and don't get too distracted. So let's jump in and all these. So number one, I wish we could do a poll, interactive poll, but I'm not sure how many of you heard of the corporate innovation offices. A lot of corporates would have either a standalone office in the Valley or partner with, some kind of accelerator to source these companies. And this is kind of your gateway to to getting to talk to corporates. So most Fortune 100 will have an office, and they're typically called, let's say, Johnson & Johnson Labs, or whatever the Fortune 100 you're targeting, BASF Labs, typically that sort of a name, so you can find them on LinkedIn. If they don't have an outpost here, they'll have some kind of accelerator partnership with Plug and Play, or Techstars, things like that. And so one tip here, from my experience, trying to reach corporates, the Silicon Valley ones tend to be much quicker to respond, much more to engage. So, for example, you can be working with your local, let's say you're in Amsterdam. So you can be working with a corporate in Amsterdam that has an innovation office there. From my experience, working with them in the local office isn't as effective. So when we started my startup, we were trying to get to airlines because that was kind of a target market there. And we worked with KLM in Amsterdam, and it wasn't as effective. Conversations took months versus we got in touch with the local folks in San Francisco, and things accelerated. And you see, it's people's KPIs to actually do these partnerships here in the Valley Everybody in the headquarters knows that Silicon Valley is supposed to bring these innovations. So again, it's just slightly easier to do it. So tip number 2, corporate innovation offices worldwide aren't the same, like I said. And tip number 1, they often host events that you can attend, or there could be webinars and things like that where you meet the staff there. And number 3, I think the most important, LinkedIn should be your friend in this outreach. So I'll show you how to do it on LinkedIn in a second. So this is just a sample of, this is from Mind the Bridge, corporate innovation offices here. And you see there's a variety of things, right? Corporate innovation antenna, corporate venture capital, corporate innovation lab, corporate R&D center. They all typically have the same charter, bring innovation to the corporate. So we'll talk about how to distinguish them and which one to approach. So talking about LinkedIn, LinkedIn should be your friend. Like I mentioned, Johnson & Johnson, and hopefully, these guys don't get too spam. It's just an example. But let's say we're a startup that is looking for digital health access to Johnson & Johnson. They see J&J could be a potential partner. Well, how do we do that, right? So you do a quick search on LinkedIn, and typically you'll find more than one office doing innovation. So number 1, prioritize the one locally. Here you have Menlo Park on the left and San Francisco on the right, but they seem to be doing the same things, right? Juan here, early innovation partnering, Melinda, J&J Labs, global head of innovation, right? So, who do you approach? Do you approach both? And how do you kind of do that? So I would say first make a list, of who you're trying to get into, who can potentially be a strategic partner for you. And I think most startups know that, right? You're in digital health, maybe it's J&J. Maybe you're in, pharmaceuticals, maybe it's Pfizer. So, or maybe you're in hotels, you want to get to those. So you typically get a list of number of those that you can approach, and then try to see who is here locally. And here's how the maze begins. So for example, Samsung, right? The company I'm familiar with, we have about 5 different innovation offices in the Valley, right? So that's Samsung Next, that's Samsung Research, that's Samsung Strategy Innovation Center, SSIC, and they all on the surface do the same thing, right? So how do you get to that, right? Even let's say, first step, you got access, you kind of connected with the folks there. How do you actually, get value from that? So I would say number 1, if you can, find an internal champion. Maybe that's an advisor that worked for Samsung that could kind of help you navigate that maze. Maybe it's a mentor. Maybe it's a friend and family. Okay, let's say you can't find a champion. Go to the website. They typically promote portfolio companies or do PR publications about who they worked with, a successful partnership. Try to find the startups they worked with and try to approach the startup. There's this chemistry talking to founder that is much easier. And then do your homework and ask them a lot of questions. So let's say I found Calm meditation app. I reach out to these guys, they respond, and I say, hey, I'm talking to Samsung. Which one should I talk to? And then, try to do your homework. Be like, hey, is Samsung Research the right partner for me? Do they do, investment? Do they do partnerships? Try to figure out what you want and pair it with what's the offering, right? For example, Samsung Next focuses on early stage, right? Early stage investment and incubation. Am I early stage? Can I approach that? Or maybe Research is N+5 kind of innovation that it's more long-term. Or maybe it's SSIC. If you go on a website, do some research, you can find out a lot of information. It's a lot of work, but if you do it up front, you really get it. You can nail it much better than just out of the blue, messaging these guys. So for example, if you are making chips or something that could be, beneficial for the chip makers, try to talk to SSIC, which is the kind of the semiconductor piece of Samsung and not the electronics. So you get more trouble when the corporations are really big. So for example, Google or Samsung, where the touch points are endless, right? Samsung makes phones, fridges, all kinds of IoT, semiconductors. So trying to narrow that down to a specific office, specific person would really help you. So another thing on that, try not to have these corporates, once you have kind of an idea who could be a potential partner, try to build that case, right? And don't let them parade you, because don't let, for example, corporates bring you too many meetings, right? Because you have a startup to build. You don't have time to talk to X VP, another VP from this. Try to be clear. What is the objective? How long is it going to take? Obviously, it's a work in progress, right? These partnerships can vary and you kind of learn new things about the startup, about the corporate, but try to be kind of very specific what this partnership could bring and bring that to the table. And also let them sell internally. At corporations, there's chains of command. Even if you're in an innovation, there probably is a chief innovation officer, or maybe your innovation branch, is under CFO, whoever it may be. There's going to be people that need to be socialized with your idea, your proposal of the partnership. So try to enable folks like me or whoever you're talking to at a corporate, try to give them the materials, kind of the data room, a link, or some things that they can then pass to other folks. So for example, we would meet with many companies a day, right? So if you are, again, I'm just kind of stuck with the digital health, but let's say you're in digital health space, I probably know digital health pretty well. So you don't have to inform me. Just make sure to show me how you're different and give me the information so I can then promote it internally, right? Because likelihood that I'll have to share it with another person internally. So those are the tips of the maze. I think that's kind of a crucial piece. Just finding the corporates isn't that difficult as long as you pick the right one, but navigating that maze could bring some trouble. So next piece, let's say you get to that meeting, you got to build what's I call the CPDM, corporate pitch deck model, right? So it's different than the investor deck, right? A lot of startups build these pitch decks for investors, and there's a lot of templates for that. There isn't that many for corporates, but there's a couple of things to keep in mind in my experience. Craft that pitch specifically for Samsung, specifically for J&J, specifically for Ford, or whoever you're trying to work with. See if you can, figure out what their needs are, right? So maybe they've been struggling in XYZ division. Maybe there's some PR about this type of technology they're trying to build. Try to make a case why you could be helpful for them. Number two, I would say drop the hockey stick. In partnership, even corporate venture capital, it is more about the knowledge about the innovation and not necessarily the, traditional VCs look at the financial return of the portfolio. In corporate venture capital, there is the return that is somewhat important, but it's more about getting access to that innovation, partnering with an innovative top startup early on, right? So you can kind of know what they're doing, how you can help them, how you can enable them to your big corporate platform that typically you have. Just like that example with Calm Meditation, putting them on 70 million phones. That's a lot, right? Number three, show that you're a safe bet. So let's say with Calm, let's say you're a Calm Meditation, you're approaching to be on Samsung phones. Show me that you're safe. It's more important to me that you're a safe bet, that you're not going to go belly up soon, than that you're going to have a hockey stick, right? Maybe later on, it also important your user growth and so on. But just the matter that if I put you in the kind of a portfolio of 70 million phones, I want to know that you can deliver. I want to know that you're not going to go run out of money. Your technology is not going to work. So the trust, safety, and especially early stage, once you go further stages, you kind of start de-risking that. So I want to know that. And often corporates can also help you financially, right? So they would have different stages of VCs to invest money if that's kind of the problem there. So again, understand the pain points of the industry and what's going on. Don't overcomplicate it. Keep it quite a simple deck. And last piece, really important, know your competition, right? So there's got to be another startup doing something similar. And when, we're going to talk to that competition, or at least we're going to research that competition. So if you don't show it on your slides, maybe that looks kind of silly that you're not aware of them, or you're sort of not showing it, or there's a weird reason, right? So before there's a proof of concept, we'll have, variety of startups doing similar things, right? They might be not as good as you are. So this is where you shine, show, hey, these guys are doing it this way, we're doing it that way. Pick us type of thing. And again, remember that it's kind of a two-sided relationship. This isn't just like corporate sitting on pedestal. They really need you, right? If you have something really good, they really need potentially be access to it and this partnership relationship together. So keep that in mind. All right, one more thing. Enable corporates to sell internally. And I think we briefly talked about that. So try to have that information easily accessible. So help me help you. So again, have these blurbs of, these are the top things, how I'm different from the competitors. And again, don't undersell yourself, right? Boast, promote, and particularly if we have, folks international on this webinar, American culture is very, particularly Silicon Valley, it's very transparent. And in startup, you want to tell me that you're the best, right? Because if you're not, or there isn't like something that I can tie it to some traction, then maybe I'll work with somebody else. So boast, feel free to talk about how good you are, how you've grown so much in certain areas. Again, people you meet with will know the space. They want to know how you're different. And remember, corporates have a bit of a different timeline than startups, right? People take vacation, people rotate, so they leave a company and go to another. So make sure you're able to have a relationship maybe with more than one person, because if that person, your point of contact, leaves, then maybe that relationship drops. They probably won't disappear. They'll probably go to a competitor or another corporate, potentially will start a company, but you're kind of de-risking that situation, but by building a relationship with more than one person. Talking about, the timeline, try to be clear with the corporates. Hey, is this going to take a year? A year in a startup environment is huge, right? It could just make or break. Is it going to take 3 months? You can assume it's going to take several months, by the time it's socialized, but you can help speed it up by, providing that information about your startup that I can then socialize. There's another hack to speeding things up. It's a little bit nuanced, and you see it in the orange at the bottom. So be cautious about it. Rule number 1, be truthful. You can't lie with this hack. But what's, down there on the slide, you see example, we work with Google. So as you can tell, these corporate innovation offices are scouting these top startups. So, and everybody's sort of competing, right? There's Google trying to get things for mobile. There's Samsung, there's maybe Huawei and things like that. They're trying to get these top startups. So if you say, I'm working or I'm talking to another company, that kind of obviously piques my interest. So just be cautious with that. I'll talk about it within the context of FOMO. And some of you might have heard of FOMO. It's well established in fundraising, but I feel like you can use it for corporate partnerships. For those of you that are new to the term, FOMO is a feeling of anxiety or insecurity over the possibility of missing out. So fear of missing out on something. So that's real, right? In the venture world, because there's these stories where VCs didn't invest in Airbnb, which is like an insane kind of return. So they're worried about missing out. They're not worried about waiting, they're worried about missing out. So VCs and sometimes corporates are in the business of waiting, because the more you wait, you kind of de-risking the situation, right? A year in a startup, you might be gone at this point, or you might grow really crazy. So as long as I'm keeping tabs and not missing out, it is a win for me. So you can use this FOMO, and there's a couple ways, in fundraising. The advice is to compact your fundraising stage into a few weeks, right? So you're reaching out to several folks at the same time and potentially getting term sheets from a variety of folks, so you can then leverage that and talk to the partners. Hey, we got a term sheet for XYZ. So it piques my interest, makes me excited to talk to you. I'll probably skip other meetings and talk to you. So use this in this case as well. As an entrepreneur, we used it quite a bit with airlines. So we had conversations with a variety of them at the beginning. Nobody wanted to commit, but we kind of try to use it. Hey, we're talking to ANA, which is a big Japanese carrier. And we're talking to KLM as well. So try to use that. Maybe compact your timeline where you're reaching out to these corporates, and see if you can get a lot of traction in the short amount of time. This way, you can sort of play this kind of FOMO nuance thing to accelerate things. So you're not waiting to get that connection with the corporate. Cool. Keep in mind, actually going back to FOMO, keep in mind that you have to be truthful, because if you say to me, hey, I'm talking to Google and I'll meet with you and I'll probably ask, how's the conversation? And obviously you don't have to disclose anything, but let's say maybe this isn't great of an interest for Samsung. I'll wait another month and then we meet again. I'm like, how is the conversation with Google? And maybe if things aren't moving or there isn't a press release or anything tangible that you can point to, keeping it confidential in some shape or form, then maybe it works against you. The same way as it works for you, that everybody's interested in your company. All of a sudden you met with Google, there wasn't much results. Maybe nobody's interested anymore. So it has kind of two sides of that FOMO building. So keep it, play with it with caution, but it could definitely help. So again, it's kind of nuanced. All right, last thing I want to talk about is don't get too distracted. And, as I mentioned in our journey, we've worked with, I think, 5 or 6 corporates, and it really helped us with fundamental stuff like sales. So we had B2C, we're selling directly to consumers, but we had partnerships with airlines. And, also all of a sudden, everybody was interested in the product because it was on the plane and there was a PR materials there. So try to use it in your advantage, but also don't get too distracted. So, we had another partnership with a corporate, I guess I won't mention the name, and it was beneficial. They had these corporate executives talk to us, I think, on a weekly basis. And, those are kind of C-level. And they also paid, I think, for 6 months of office space in San Francisco. And, for early stage, that's kind of attractive, right? Because 6 months, let's say $3,000 to $4,000 per month for desk. So, 24, let's say $25,000 I'm saving. But then we were also stuck in these meetings with the executives, and it was kind of redundant. Nothing came out of it. They were sort of just showing us to more people that came to Silicon Valley. So a bit of a waste potentially. Depends how you look at it, right? Was the kind of cost saving beneficial or not? Nothing came out of it. Could we have predicted it? Not sure. It's not necessarily a loss per se, because with these things, you don't know if you're attractive to a corporate, if you're going to take their offer or not. So I would just say, keep on the focus on the core thing, which is building your product as a startup. Because if you stop building your product and focus on the corporate partnerships, sooner or later, your product is not going to be attractive to these corporates, right? Because you dropped the ball on the most important thing. You're not growing. You're not doing the things to accelerate you. And the reason you're a startup is because you're growing like crazy and you can do things that others can't in that short amount of time. So keep in mind, this is more of a garnish. You can have a nice cocktail, but if you don't have the base of that, garnish is not going to help you, right? You can really utilize those. And I think we did that, and we can jump into more specifics in Q&A, but don't get too distracted. Make sure you focus on what's important and utilize these to accelerate you, not other way around. Lastly, be careful with the FOMO. I've seen it work really well. I've seen it also not work too well, particularly when startups lie. Don't lie that you're meeting with someone that you're not. It's going to harm you sooner or later when they find out the kind of relationship falls apart. But if you're truthful, that FOMO could work. Try to sign LOIs if you can. Some corporates do that, some don't. And lastly, you'll try to win big with leverage and don't show all your cards. Sign NDAs. I haven't seen in the Valley any malicious behavior from corporates, because it's more about competition with other corporates. So let's say, if I'm not truthful with the startup, or if I'm, in some sort of malicious contract with a company, that news is going to come out and the new wave of startup is not going to work with Samsung. So that's not a common thing to do, but just keep in mind, obviously they're bigger companies. They could maybe build that product or leverage the network. Just be open about the partnership and the technology you have, the kind of, a value added that you can bring. Sign NDAs. It's really, really common. You're typically going to have to sign an NDA from a corporate. They have it all looked at legal, so you end up signing theirs. So I think that's it for me. I'm just looking at the time. We can jump into more interactive piece, which I'm excited. Thank you guys You can follow me on Twitter. You can add me on LinkedIn. Let's jump into the Q&A. And I think so we'll stop sharing for that piece. So
Awesome.
back
Thank
to
you so
you,
much,
Colin.
Tomas. Great stuff. Love it. Let's jump into some Q&A. And as Anna just asked, if you have got any questions, drop them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll jump right in. So a lot of this was in tech partnership land, but would this be applicable to, let's say, lifestyle, skincare, beauty brands?
Yeah. I mean, the list is long. You could reach Fortune 500 if you want to stretch that out. So if there's beauty, I'm not sure who's in that space. Maybe L'Oreal, whatever. They're big, corporate. So I think it's all applicable. The model is pretty similar, right? So corporates try to take the best, best ways to work with startups. So you'll see, folks floating from one corporate to another, and kind of the playbook is the same. So it would definitely work. If they're slightly smaller, again, they might not have an office, which I think L'Oreal or Big Cosmetics would. There's some headquartered in San Francisco, so they'll definitely have like folks in innovation. If they don't, try accelerators.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So corporates often deal with the build versus buy. So we get a question here from James. How do you keep corporates from just building the product themselves?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things, one, you got to show that you have something that is going to take them multiple years, or maybe they won't be able to do it. Often it's cheaper to partner or buy than build internally. Keep in mind, especially companies like Samsung, there's massive kind of chain of command. By the time to bring the product to life, it takes forever. So again, it could be less expensive to do. I would say, I'll give you an example, like Calm meditation app. Really obvious that Samsung could build that any day and probably quickly, right? So Calm meditation it was just still is meditation platform. We could build that quickly. Is that part of the core business? Not necessarily, right? Does Calm already have, large number of users? Is the partnership beneficial, where we can, charge a percentage of a sign up through the health platform? So yes, and Samsung never built that. Will they? I don't think so. So try to look at what's the core business for the corporate, how you can complement that, right? So and see what are the synergies there. And again, they're most likely. Again, it's sort of cheaper to work with a startup and buy it ultimately if you have enough.
Awesome. Let's see. In terms of cadence of communications, how often should one reach out or follow up with these corporates when you're going through the sales cycle?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, just keeping them updated, if you have some kind of bullet points, the same way you would do with investors. So try to highlight, look, depending on the space you are, look, we just signed these big partnerships, or we have growing number of users, or we just raised more money. Try to put these highlights, at least once a month, I would say. And you're probably doing it for investors. It's good for you to do for yourself. So keep them posted. They're probably not going to respond to your updates, but they'll probably skim through them. So, you're being top of mind. So I think do that. Again, if you're in more advanced partnerships, you probably talk to them on a frequent basis. But if you're trying to get to them, being top of mind is always helpful. For example, maybe it's the kind of the flavor of the month is AI, and you're building AI, and then maybe it's crypto all of a sudden. So startups know about timing as well. So if you keep it in mind, there was this big joke after Apple has released the AR headset, where VCs started dusting out all the emails that supposedly went to spam, and they started looking at the emails that they got from AR VR companies, because all of a sudden, Apple was doing it, so it's a big deal. So keep in mind, it could be timing for corporate, so keeping them in the loop could be helpful, and it's easier for them to find it in their emails.
Awesome. Let's see another question here around, we're talking to multiple corporates for SaaS, for a SaaS product. do we sign the NDA when we're presenting, or when do you start piloting or working with them?
So there might be different ones. Typically, you sign it right away. At least that's what I've done. And if they haven't sent it to you, just ask. And it really is the same template they sent to all the other companies. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. And again, NDA is just a legal thing. If you work with the folks in the Valley, typically, the idea is, again, not to have any malicious type of behavior. Just sign it. If they'll most likely won't let you do revisions to it much, but obviously read it and have your legal look at it. But they're pretty standard.
Great. How to decide if I need to join an accelerator or a corporate venture?
Yeah, I mean, see what's out there, see what stage you are. If you haven't raised any money, you don't have any traction, probably accelerator could be a good bet. Just to kick things off. Accelerators, you'll give up a lot of equity. So typically, 5 to 7%. So see what works, right? For typically, I think the average now is about 150, 200,000 you get for that equity. So if you're much further, maybe accelerator is not a good deal for you. Unless you're international and you're buying that network, then maybe it is. So evaluate that. Corporate's typically slightly later. You can start that relationship. But remember, you're going to have to show something how you're special or different, right? Whether that's traction or your patents. Corporate typically like patents, that sort of thing.
Great. Let's see. In my prior work at large Silicon Valley companies, Intel, LG Electronics, working with startups, the startups could be easily overwhelmed with requests on product customization, et cetera, death by 1,000 paper cuts, as they say. What advice can you give to our founders about this?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, couple things. If it all depends on your situation, right? If this is your first customer, as they say, do things that don't scale, you kind of have to please them and do variety of things for them just to get that first customer, big customer. If it's your not first one and, the asks are totally unreasonable, just push back. And I think you'll get some respect for pushing back, right? I think from my side or my former side of the table is, you ask as much as you can to get all this information, but you can try to have a dialogue. Again, it's not one-sided. And the more you push back and have a dialogue and reasons why, hey, this is going to take months to implement, or it doesn't make sense for these reasons, I think you can have a good discussion, right? Just make sure you have specific reasons to not do something. And if it's resources, maybe that corporate can provide those, right? Maybe they can lend you some engineering or some investing or some grant. Samsung has some grants, especially working with early stage, which is like 100K to build something that they're asking. So, if they're asking you for something out of the blue, maybe ask, hey, can you pay for that? Because look, we can't afford this and we don't have time. And so when you work with the local guys in the Valley, they should understand that. Again, if they don't, try to push back.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think if it's not a core thing that all of your customers are asking for, you're looking for what's good right now and not what's good future down the line.
Exactly. And they might not know, right? You probably know better what's helpful for your customers versus what's helpful for the corporate for some reason. If there's reasoning, on both sides, you can start to argue and discuss things.
Yep. Love that. Let's see. Another question here on, so obviously strategic partnerships with these large companies have long sales cycles. So what are some of your tips on how startups can either get clarity on how long that sales cycle is, or on how to shorten that sales cycle once your foot's in the door?
Yeah. So to shorten, you can kind of play with the FOMO that I mentioned. And, ideally you have several parties interested in your solution. That always accelerates things, right? If somebody else, if LG is looking at you, then there may be something interesting. I think, again, be transparent, put a timeline in place. Don't let it, quote unquote, don't let them parade you in front of like, it's good to get exposure to like a C-level. So let's say we have a big meeting at Samsung and corporate executives are coming. We want to showcase you, and I think it's a great thing for both. When that starts to happen on the like a frequent monthly basis, then be like, okay, look, I already talked to your CFO or the head of the division. This isn't really, we don't have time for this. So try to push back. And also, if it is just about parading, try to get clarity. Like, where's that going to take us? Is this helping your job, right? Because you're introducing the startup to all these different divisions, or you're trying to find a home for this startup and there's like something behind it. Try to get that timeline. If it takes more than 3 months, maybe pause, maybe say, hey, maybe it's not the right time now. Let us grow these metrics that you want, and then let's talk again. There's nothing wrong with that. One last tip, try to talk to startups that worked with one of the corporates and be like, hey, how long did it take you? Did they really do this and that with you, or is it abnormal? If it's taking a year, it's not a fit. It's just, maybe you're good for presentations.
Yeah, great. Let's see. We've got another question here around common mistakes other than being dishonest in the terms of the FOMO land. What are some of the other common mistakes you see when just cold outreach or just anything throughout the process that you got?
Yeah, I think once I mentioned, being aware of competition, these guys or gals will have all the third-party research, pitch book and things. So they have, these Excels and databases of startups. So be open about that. So that's one. Being honest is important. Let's see. Common mistake I've seen. Lying about your traction could be bad, right? Startups tend to kind of fudge the truth. Try to approach it on more like a, open relationship versus, I'm going to show you all the good things that I have, because again, there's tools to help you. If you can't deliver for 70 million phones, maybe we can lend you a hand with financing, or even it could be some form. So that would be a big one. One last one actually I thought of. Try to do your research ahead of time. Try to figure out what my Samsung would look for, right? And try to craft your presentation for that corporate specifically. Because if you have one that's just going to all of them, it's always much better to see something very specific for that business unit, and come up with an idea. Hey, this could work on mobile. This could work on your new line of fridges because I saw this. It may or may not go that way, but at least you're showing kind of this being proactive. I think these have gone much further than I've seen.
I love that. And also, honesty throughout the whole process as you continue to remind people. I think it's key too. Let's see. So when communicating your competitive advantage over your competitors, how do you make yourself look bad without trash talking the competitors?
Yeah.
For lack of a better word.
Yeah. Meaning I would say, be honest with yourself too. Do you have a better traction, or you have, with, let's say, this corporate's platform, you can gain this traction, right? Maybe if you work with Samsung and again, with all this user base, this could be a win-win for both. So, what is your traction? As a startup, you must have something unique, right? To be a good startup, or you're ahead of the curve, or you think you are, or you think, consumers will want this, right? They just don't know about it, or are starting to know about it because, I guess because whatever social change, people are, watching TikTok, and you're kind of this TikTok plugin, whatever that is, right? Try to build a case. And we often did for, just to pass it to executive, we would say, hey, there's a social shift. Obvious example would be pandemic, right? But we're obviously past that. But let's say pandemic, people were indoors, they want this, and we see kind of this kind of starting. and because there's 3 startups there in investment, and this is just going to explode. So try to paint that vision. I think it'll be helpful for investment, generally for any of your life as a startup, right? Because you're promising this big thing, big change, and you have the solution for that big change. Whether that's going to happen or not, nobody knows, right? But painting that big picture, look, everybody's going to use glucose monitors, right? So we have this app for glucose monitors, right? And you can put it in your watch, whatever. So big picture, and then down to your specific solution that you have.
That's great advice. And in terms of thinking about the decision makers, obviously these companies are huge, and you mentioned the multi-layered approach. How do you identify quickly who the actual decision maker, i.e. the check writer, would be that you actually need to get in the room versus just having, the pageantry like you were talking about?
Right. That's a little hard. I think if you have a clear vision that, let's say, your product is going to go to the next, or you want it to go to the next kind of wave of fridges, then you can kind of tell, hey, this is going to be digital appliances division. Probably the head has to sign off of that. We have to do this kind of proof that works. So I think twofold, trying to map it in your head where you see this product and what potentially that involves, and then just asking, because honestly, it's so different in each corporate. For Samsung, maybe the headquarters in Korea has to have a say. Maybe they don't. Maybe there's enough kind of they give us enough room to make these decisions. I think asking is also helpful, right? It's kind of pretty obvious, but hey, like, how many people need to see this to make a decision? What do you need to see for us to move forward? And then the kind of the tip that I mentioned before, try to talk to folks that have been through this process. Who did they talk to? How much did it take? Did they have to have a sign off of CFO or not? Or whatever that may be.
Another question here around the early stages of this process. So early stage startups who are thinking about setting up the right processes and systems to get ready to have these conversations. What are some of the things that you've seen startups not have when opening in these conversations that people should have on the back end, even just moving into these conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is helpful for both, fundraising and also these partnerships. Make sure you have the obvious. They're going to ask for the deck for sure, right? So have this corporate deck that I mentioned that has these specific, couple things. So have a deck ready, have a short deck ready, have a emailing deck. A lot of startups use, DocuSign. Was it DocuSign? Or I think it's DocuSign, where you can just send a link and they have to put their email, and you can kind of see where they spent the most time on which slides, things like that.
Oh,
DocSend, there you go. And I think Google does that too now. But anyway, that's a good tip, and you can kind of see who's been looking at it. So have these decks ready, have a short blurb. It's kind of a very simple thing, but have a short blurb, really 2 sentences, what you do and how you're different. Feel free to brag, hey, we raised $2 million, or hey, we have, X number of users, or whatever that, or we're, doing research with Stanford, or, we had early adopters, whatever that catch is, that hook. So make sure you have that hook. Have a list, right? So have that data room of your materials ready before you do that, because they're going to ask for it. You're going to have to modify it, but at least you have something to start with. And then have a list of these corporates, right? So there's more than one. And, if you condense that timeline and you have an Excel, literally, you can just pull those off LinkedIn of who are the people in these corporate innovation offices, how many there are, and start your outreach. And then kind of keep in your mind how you're going to approach that if they say yes, and what are going to be the steps. So again, hey, our product that we're building is going to be great for these fridges that you're coming up with in 24, or whatever that may be. So once you have that, go ahead and start and see where it goes. And don't be shy to what works best is obviously warm introductions. If you can't get those, try the events where you can meet people in person or even online, and then you can send them a LinkedIn. Hey, loved your webinar. I know you're at Johnson Johnson. I have this startup. Can we set up 15 minutes? Here's my Calendly. And don't be afraid to follow up. Also, you send somebody one message on LinkedIn, follow up 1 or 2 times, and then maybe stop.
Yeah. Love it. Well, we're almost at time. If somebody was going to dial into the last couple minutes of this, what's one key takeaway based on all of the great advice that you've given us that you want our entrepreneurs to hear and learn from?
I think the key one is, hey, times have changed. You're not that insignificant small startup working with these 500-pound gorillas. This is, they need you as much as you need them. So don't be afraid to talk to them. You can also be bigger than them one day potentially, right? Or they can take you there. So keep that in mind. You're not insignificant. If you're doing this startup, if you're committing full time, there's got to be something to it. So keep your head up.
Love that. Well, Tomasz, thank you so much for taking the time today to share your expertise, your experience with our audience. I'm sure everyone appreciates it. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. For everyone still here, we would love you to join our upcoming webinars. So check them out in the chat. But thank you so much, Tomasz, and everyone in attendance for joining us today.
One last thing, I threw in a Google form. If you like the deck, you can just say yes and put your email. I'll send it to you. I know a lot of people would typically ask for the deck, so I can share it.
Yeah, and we'll be sending that link in the follow-up email as well.
Nice.
But yeah, Tomasz, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully this was helpful for everybody in attendance.
Hope so. Thanks, Colin. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Alrighty, have a good one. We'll see you all online soon.